Hello. I am coming to you today from my office. I don't understand if you're listening on the podcast. What you can see on my face is like I'm not wearing makeup. Not really. And like I'm very red around the chin. I don't know. Maybe the cold weather. Age. Got some pimples. Look at me in my glory. I told you I was going to do it. So if you're listening to the podcast, either trust that I look a little bit of a mess, maybe a hot mess, or check out the video on the YouTube. So I guess this is episode 2 of series 4, Experience, Strength, and Hope. What it was like, what happened, what it's like now. And I'll try to keep it a little shorter. I'll tell you what I've been going through recently, and I talked about this, I think, in other series, sort of when I would go off on a tangent. I mentioned in the first episode of this that my mother did a lot of food restriction with me as a kid, and that became a real problem with food for me as an adult. And I think I started or did tell you about binge eating, maybe. So I still have an issue with eating in secret, especially late at night in bed. And I know the root of and it's like binge eating. It's not like grapes. It's not a snack. It's like, last night would be a prime example. There were 6 leftover hamburger buns from Richard's dinner, and I ate all 6 in bed, along with some dried cherries and some peanuts. So it's like that. It's like a 1,700 calorie late night snack. At this point, my feeling about it is that it's like a habit. It's not an addiction, perhaps, but a habit. So it's like muscle memory, brain memory. My brain expects it, and I do it. And our brains default very easily to that, right? No matter how much willpower or strength of character we have, habit is habit, and habit requires a lot of discomfort to change. And I have been working the last few years, really, but really this last year much more, on changing that habit. But the last few nights have seen a slip in the behavior, which means that, I get up at 2:30 a.m. I don't know why it's that time, but maybe it's just to pee, and then I eat. And I eat, and I eat, and I eat, and I eat, and I eat myself back to sleep. I could come up with 100 reasons or excuses for the behavior. I'm sure it has to do with stress sometimes. I'm sure it has to. So, where was I? That was my husband calling. So yeah, reasons. There are reasons. There are excuses. Some of the reasons are real. Some of them aren't just excuses. Hormones, that sort of thing. It definitely happens more when I'm ovulating or when I'm menstruating, right? But it is still habit, and it is a habit that I feel I'm sort of desperate to change because I've changed so many. Like drinking and smoking and weight loss in general meant a lot of habit changing. And binging prior to my weight loss, I lost 100 pounds a long time ago, and that'll come up further along in this series. But it annoys me that I can't just change this one, and I forget how hard it was to change all those other things. And using the AA model, it's sort of the step 6 and 7 part of it, the cognitive behavioral therapy part of it now, because I know why I do it. I know the original trauma. I know all the reasons. I know what caused it and why. And, self-knowledge is availing me nothing. So it is now just about replacing the thought. And I think there was someone who wrote about sobriety, some book maybe called Moderation Management. I don't know if I'm connecting the right dots here. Who wrote about the lizard brain versus the sort of normal intellectual brain. And the lizard brain is like our old brain, or you might think of it as your angel and your devil. Your intellectual thinking brain is your angel, and the lizard brain is the devil. Noom, which I'm using right now, which has helped more than other things, calls it the elephant and the rider. So the rider is the angel and the elephant is the devil. And so it's sort of like when the elephant or the lizard, they want that what's good, right? The yummy foods or the behavior that makes them feel good, whatever. And so it's the rider or the angel or the intellectual brain that has to talk them down. And I can do that a lot of the time, but not all the time. And then I get really, really down on myself. And I definitely head into this all or nothing thinking, like, I'm never going to get a hold of this one. I have no control over anything about food. It's going to affect me forever. I'm never going to be able to stay one weight because I'm always going to have this problem. It's not worth it. And then it also goes into some pretty serious self-loathing. So a week ago, I felt as confident as I've ever felt. And now I've had like 3 nights of this. God, it makes me cry. I've had like 3 nights of this sneaky late night binging, or they call it on Noom, storm eating, which actually is really good. Storm eating. And the self-loathing creeps back in, man. And between self-loathing and black and white thinking, it's very hard to get back on track and remind myself that I know I can do it because I did it for many, many days in a row. In fact, at one point this year, I did it for many, many weeks in a row. So I know I can. And also, as a normal human being, I know there are going to be slips. And that thankfully, unlike with alcohol or drugs, the slips aren't, going to kill me. In the moment, at least. The thing is, if I let myself get too far back into this, they could. I was at my heaviest about, I want to say 15 years ago, 16 years ago, 260 pounds, a size 22, 24. And if you have seen pictures of me or the video, the pimple that I have right now, you'll know that's pretty extreme. And maybe I'll post in this a picture of before and after, the difference. And I was able to adopt the habit of exercise, and I've never given that up. And obviously I'm sober, and while I still take my nicotine lozenges, I did quit smoking. So I know I can. Oh, but man, the self-loathing and it's pretty stunning how quickly food can take me to a bad place. And sometimes when I'm talking myself down at night, those are the things I do. Just like in early sobriety, I remind myself of the way I feel the next day. The desire to punish myself the next day by restricting or intermittent fasting, which I'm not really intermittent fasting. I'm using that to cover up a restriction, in my case, to punish myself. So, yeah, so this all starts sort of where we left off in the last episode, which is like the part that made me saddest talking about, was the food restriction. And it makes me sad in part because I don't think any little person should be worrying about how skinny she is at 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. And also, because I still have the fucking problem. It really is like an addiction. It's the oldest addiction. And I have changed it a lot over the years. The binges are much smaller. The binges are a lot less frequent. I don't actually give up events to eat. I don't give up life to eat, and I have to remember that. but let me pop back into the past again. So that restriction was going on, and I think I mentioned that, like, we went to a club. I'm not complaining that I had a nice privileged life, but I didn't ask for it, and I didn't want it. And at this point in my life, it's pretty much everything I stand against. We went to a club that was like had a token Jewish member, right? I mean, there were like 2 Catholic members. This is like full on Episcopalian, quiet racism and anti-Semitism, quiet at least publicly. Anyway, so she would have like one of the young women there who babysat for me, Jenny, I think her name was. She would have her stop me at the snack bar because I would be there alone with my best friend all day, all summer. But Jenny would kind of stop me if I went to get ice cream or French fries, or tell on me if I did it, and I'd have to like sneak around. Even when my friends were getting stuff, it wasn't allowed. Somehow nobody stopped me from sipping the end of all the drinks. Whatever. So that was embarrassing, even if other people didn't know. I thought they knew, you think, and that was bad. So pretty early on, I start stealing money from my parents. And I remember the first time I got caught for it. I must have been 8, maybe 9, maybe like 10. I don't know. I don't want to pretend to be accurate about that because I can't place it in time. But we were in the house in Southampton, and I had a $20 bill in my wallet, and I had like one of those see-through wallets. And I remember my mother coming to me and finding it and saying, "How the hell did you get $20?" Because they didn't give me $20. And that was the first time I got caught stealing. I was caught stealing many, many, many more times going forward, but that one stands out. And I kept stealing for many, many, many years, right under their noses. Sometimes they knew. I think my father probably knew because it was mostly from him, and he just didn't say anything to my mother. That was the first time. And so when I first started stealing money from my parents, it was to buy food, to buy the things I wasn't allowed to have. And I was a kid so when I was 8 years old, my father lost his job, and we had had a very sort of nice lifestyle prior to that. And I think the expectation was that we would continue to have a very nice lifestyle. But he had not planned for losing his job. My mother was not prepared for it. It was a time in the advertising world when they were sort of getting rid of all the old guys, making way for the new ones. And he was one of the old guys, and he'd been in advertising his whole life. And he and some of the guys, I think, sued for age discrimination, which was only just becoming a possible thing. I mean, if you're young and listening to this, you don't really know. Like, these things weren't things, even 30 years ago, right? So in terms of how fast the world is changing, it's faster than you think if you're young. You haven't been around long enough. But 30 years is pretty fast to have made something like age discrimination really, really not okay. So this was the 80s, and it was just the beginning of that sort of thing, and people were just acknowledging it, and he didn't win. And he started his own advertising business that didn't do very well. And so my mother was working at a museum at the time, and it was supposed to be part-time, and it was still supposed to be part-time, so she was only being paid for part-time, but she probably put in at least 40 hours a week, if not more, there. And in order to keep our lifestyle as nice as it was on the outside, I guess she decided, I'm not sure how the decision came about, if someone suggested it, but she decided to start a catering business. And it ended up reasonably profitable. This was at a time in New York when it was sort of new to have a party privately catered. And it was maybe not new, but a big deal. Like, it was a way to show off. If you've ever seen the movie Working Girl, think Working Girl. Think about those catered events in Working Girl. That's what my mom was doing. She was doing it out of the kitchen in our house. So basically, my parents were now working, I would say, if we average it out, 16-hour days every day. But just to like not put a fine point on it, they were basically never home. And my mother was always terrified about money. She was always talking about how we were going to be on the street, and very, very freaked out by all of it, working so hard. My father was now a bartender and waiter in her catering business and helping her cook, which is humbling for a man of his background and privilege and life, and a wonderful lesson for me, whether he knew it or not, was to see someone do something like that with dignity and grace and a really good attitude. I mean, it's because he's, bartending at parties that he may well have been invited to prior to that. So I'm sure this hurt for him. I never saw it. I'm sure it wounded him. I can only imagine that a man born into the life he had in 1924 and fighting in World War II, and I can only imagine that it must have been very humbling at best. And I'm not saying he didn't need a little bit of that. He had some entitlement issues, but not ones that I saw regularly. Maybe a good lesson, but it still hurts to think of someone you love sort of being crushed by circumstance, and then also by his wife, a lot. And she knows that now, and she regrets it and wishes she'd done things differently. And she too was much younger. If I think about it, my age-ish. So this is right around the time that I get real angry, or angrier, and start stealing. So they're never home. I'm going to and from school alone, and school was in New York City. So school was a subway ride or a bus, 2 buses, or a bus and a subway ride. And by 8 or 9, I guess I'm mostly going alone, because they have morning catering jobs, and then sometimes they're out till 1 or 2 in the morning. I start lying to them to try and get them home. Calling them at catering jobs and saying someone's knocking on the door when no one was knocking on the door. I remember that one. And I start kind of getting up to no good at home when I'm at home alone. There wasn't porn like there is now, so I'm pretty sure I would have gotten into that. But we had Robin Bird on, free cable, whatever. Watched a lot of that and ate. So whatever leftovers were there from the catering job, ate them. Whatever candy I had procured en route home with the money I'd stolen, ate that. And I would hide everything, all the wrappers, next to my bed, down the side of my bed. One of those genius moves by kids, like, nobody's going to find it here. And then adults saying, wouldn't you have hidden it better if you didn't want to be caught? I don't know. I don't know what my little psyche was doing. I don't know if I was trying to be caught, or I just hadn't come up with a more creative means of disposal at that age. In the end, there's very little reason to hide it because your body starts showing it. So I started gaining more weight, which only made me feel more different from and less lovable. But it certainly was putting a wall up. It certainly was saying, oh, well, here's why people don't love me. All of this. And it kept people at a distance. I remember, I don't know if this started with the food. This must have been older. But I would sneak into my parents' bedroom while they were sleeping and take money out of my father's money clip. Like at 7 a.m. in the morning before anybody got up. I mean, that's, I think that may have been later in life when I started stealing to buy things, not for myself, but for others, so they would like me. Oh, pathetic. I'm not saying I'm pathetic, but a little pathetic. That's when you start to get into the drinking years a little bit, the young drinking years. And I know better now that what that young woman was searching for. But there's some shame, right, and that keeps me from ever doing that kind of thing again. So I'm stealing money, and my parents are never home, and I'm eating, and just, man, like I was so uncomfortable. I was so uncomfortable in every situation. I know now a lot of that is the anxiety I never knew I had. My parents were sending me to a shrink, Dr. Woods, and I think she prescribed some antidepressants, but antidepressants at the time were pretty much Prozac, which I don't think did anything for me then. And I would talk to her every week, and I think it helped to a degree, but there was definitely a concern that she was reporting back, and probably she was to a degree. My mom seemed to know more than I'd have liked her to know. And she would read my diary and all of that, starting young and throughout the rest of my life, which, in defense of her now, if I had a child who was as scary as I was, behaving in the ways I was, I'd want to get a handle on the diary too. But finding that out didn't help me to be less angry with her. Anyway, I keep going off because all of this is harder than I thought. So yeah, a lot of time alone from around 8 or 9 years old. A lot of eating, crying, yelling, a lot of anger. Very afraid in my life, afraid of other people, afraid of judgment. So you see that sort of alcoholic tendency. They call it alcoholic tendency of not fitting in, feeling like I don't fit in, feeling like I'm not comfortable in my own skin from a very young age. Wouldn't it be funny if we all just had major anxiety disorders? I don't think that, but so very uncomfortable years. My best friend was living in Southampton, and then I think she was 11, so I was 9 when she was sent to boarding school. Her mother, who's another story altogether, rough. I want to talk childhood, not comparing, but hers was much more difficult in many ways than mine. I always had friends at school. I wasn't like a loser, as they say. I always had a good friend, if not a few. So I wasn't lonely in that way. But I felt very uncomfortable with them too, because they were wealthier, they were prettier, at least in my mind. Their parents seemed nicer, but I don't know what was going on behind closed doors. And in fact, some of them had spectacularly difficult times, it turned out, behind closed doors before, which I didn't find out for many years. I remember once a friend of mine, Jessica, was coming over for a play date, and she had a very, on the outside, very amazing life, right? Everything looked perfect from a child's point of view, wealthy and whatever, happy. And she was coming over for a play date, and the night before, I set the table with all our finest family china and silver, and when she got there, I told her the maid had done it the night before, or the maid had done it for us for dinner. I was embarrassed that I didn't have as much as my friends, and when I think back now, I think about how much I wish my parents had not done the catering business and not tried to make ends meet in this big fancy life, and instead brought the size of the life down and lived on less and lived a less fancy life, if that makes any sense. I remember around that time too, I was having a birthday party. My grandmother was visiting from Australia, and I wanted so badly to have a Rice Krispie treat cake, and my mother wouldn't let me. She made some horrible healthy lemon poppy seed cake that, no one liked and nobody wanted to eat. And I'm not saying all this again to be like, oh, poor little me. It's just those little memories of like how weird food got how early, and how much that influenced the way I felt about myself, and to this day how I feel about myself. And also, it is really the beginnings of my addiction problems, and my alcoholism, and I end up using alcohol very much the same way I used food, and then later I use them all when alcohol alone is not working and food alone is not working. Coke alone is not working. And that all, I guess, begins somewhere in around 12 years old is when there's a shift. I remember, so I'm getting fatter and I'm sent to a team by my mother. A team of doctors. One is a nutritionist and one is a psychiatrist. And this was on like 79th Street and 3rd Avenue. I remember it so perfectly. And there was a Dunkin' Donuts downstairs and a David's Cookies across the street. And I would have to go in every week and I would get weighed. And then I've sort of blacked out what we talked about. I guess it was my anger and depression, and then what I ate. And I think we laid out like meal plans or suggestions on what to eat. And I just remember leaving, and every single time I would go to the Dunkin' Donuts with stolen money and buy like a bunch of donuts and eat them all on the way home as like the ultimate fuck you, I'm definitely like that kind of thing starts to really, I can see now, I didn't know then, starts to make me angrier and angrier. And because I'm also getting heavier and angrier, I'm looking for more ways to rebel. And being a good girl at my prep school with all its fancy, wealthy kids with whom, all of whom are very nice, but with whom I don't feel like I fit in isn't going to work for me. And I'm going to find another way. And again, none of it was rational, but I found some friends that weren't at my prep school. They hung out outside the prep schools. And some of them were from that neighborhood on the Upper East Side. There were a lot of kids like from the Yorkville neighborhood, a lot of Irish kids, a lot of Albanian kids. So I started hanging out with them a little bit more. I met some of the boys from the boys' schools, and I became sort of desperate to be liked by boys because I thought that was a way in, a way to be cool. So very young, I start doing things, that I shouldn't do. I remember sort of hitting on, if you can do that at 13 years old, a kid named George from a prep school a few blocks down from mine. And I don't know. I mean, he was maybe my friend's boyfriend. I don't think any of that factored into my thinking. I had decided somewhere, and I don't know whether it was sort of a conscious decision, that being a slut, as they say, was a way to protect myself. And I guess we know now that it's also a way to feel loved, right? So you're looking for boys and sexual intimacy in order to fill a need for love. And also a desire to be popular somehow. Like if you're the one who can get the boys, but not if you're the one who can get the boys because you get blowjobs. It turns out that's not the way. So that's what I did. I gave little George a little blowjob in the backseat of a taxi. And my slut life took off from there. I can use the word slut. I can make it my own. Because I was, under the standard definition of the word. That's how I behaved for many, many, many more years. And I think I thought it was to be cool and to be bad in the front of my mind. It never felt good. But I hardened myself to that quickly. So it was around this George blowjob taxi, 12 or 13. I start smoking cigarettes. Of course, I have to go hard, and I start smoking Camel Unfiltered. Or, yeah, Marlboro Reds, that kind of thing. I later switched to Capri for a little while when I'm trying on a new personality. But then I was going to be hard. So through George and some of the boys there, they knew some boys from some of the public schools in the neighborhood, and those boys knew some boys from uptown. And so I started hanging out much more with the guys from the public schools in the neighborhood and their friends from uptown. And this is young. We're still looking in the 12 to 14 range here, 12 to 15 maybe. Yeah. I think that may be all I can talk about today in this one. I'm not sure I made any sense or have said anything that will help anybody. But I hope that if you do identify with any of this or made any of these choices or have similar stories or whatever, that, as sad as I am about my binge eating now and having a bad day, life is, for all intents and purposes, fine. I made it through all of it fine. I learned a lot, and I wouldn't be who I am today without all of it. And so some of it makes me cry. Some of it makes me angry. But now it's all a part of the fabric of my life, right? And I wouldn't be as awesome as I am without it. And that's, including the breakdowns over food and all the shit that, we all go through, this human stuff. That's a part of life too. And I'm hoping that I can, quote unquote, conquer that so that I have another experience under my belt, another achievement, so to speak, that I can use to help others. This seems like it was just a long, pointless rant. I hope not pointless. It helped me, and I really, really hope it helps someone else too, because, there is a way through all of this. I promise. I love you.